I'm Jeremy Till, and this is Amplify. It was an honor to get to interview our next guest, Paul Carrozza, the founder of RunTex. Paul is instrumental in the fitness community in Austin and influencing the nation in running. Paul has established his run shoe company here in Austin back in the 80s and really influencing the whole marketplace in Austin and what it meant to be a runner and what it meant to be fit in Austin. Once again, like I said, it was an honor to interview him. Being in the fitness industry myself for the past 11 years, I wouldn't be where I am today. They say standing on the shoulders of giants. Paul is one of those giants that created the opportunity that I live in and so many do in Austin. And I would also say Austin would not be ranked one of the top fittest communities in the nation if it wasn't for Paul. Paul served on the President's Council for Health and Wellness and Fitness and has influenced millions in the running community through Runner's World, Shoe Review, and things in that nature. So once again, just honored to have Paul on and grateful that he has got to share his life experience with us. So here is Paul. Awesome. Well, great. Well, I was just introducing Paul Carrozza here to the Amplify podcast. We're super honored to have Paul in here. From my standpoint, being in the fitness industry in Austin and health and wellness, Paul was really a forerunner in this space. And in my early days of the first, decade of doing this, I always looked to RunTex and Paul as a leader that I could really model and aspire to be like. So just to have him in here and do the podcast. And I know, talking with Paul, he's got an extensive history with running and fitness and all that stuff. So excited to have him here and learn a little bit about him and, what he's up to and doing. And he's always at the front of trends and things like that. So also I'm really interested to talk to him about his methods of networking. I think it's always unique to hear the different conversations and people Paul's talking with. So with any further ado, Paul, welcome.
Morning. Good morning. How are you? It's good to be here. I'm impressed with what you guys done with this facility.
Thank you. Yeah, this down here used to really be a graveyard of signs and barbed wire, and it was just falling apart.
Yeah.
So in 4
you guys
years,
have come a long way from the back of RunTex.
Oh, right. It's so amazing. We were there a lot. We have clients that are still here that we were in the back there that worked out, and it's amazing because this is 5,000 square feet.
Oh, wow.
Across the way, and we were working out of like 1,200 square feet in the back of your spot.
Yeah.
But
you got it done.
Oh yeah. Whatever it takes.
Yeah, it shows it's really about what you're doing, not the space you're doing it in, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, kind of what I want to get started with is kind of like your history as an athlete, because I know you were a runner, and kind of like how you got into the sport and kind of what the whole origins.
Yeah, I mean, I think of when I think of being a runner, being a sustainable distance runner wasn't what I was intending to do. I've been running athletically from as long as I can remember, and it was always something that was on the front of my mind, not the back of my mind. So couldn't wait for recess, couldn't wait for PE, couldn't wait for intramurals, couldn't wait for sports, and it's just how I spent my time. And it wasn't kind of the lonely road of the distance runner. It was more about getting a bunch of folks together and go play games, play football, play basketball. So we just played a lot. And so growing up athletically, I was asthmatic as a child, and I was sick a lot. I was the usual preemie, always sick. So my mom was, we were in a house in Colorado that had combustion issues, and so we got some carbon monoxide poisoning and had liver issues young. And my mom was way ahead because she was trying to rebuild our health. She's an RN, and so I was everything I see that's in the marketplace now with Whole Foods, and I've been living since I was 5. Choking down the vitamins, eating the homemade bread, spreading the peanut butter that had to get the oil churned into it, and just wish I could have one of those salami and cheese and mayonnaise sandwiches on white bread the other kids had, but my bread was falling apart. I went from being sort of sickly to building strength through, I would say, mostly through great nutrition, but a lot of physical activity. And the physical activity wasn't structured around getting in a specific workout in. It was more about just living a a very active lifestyle, last thing I wanted to do was be inside and be pent up, So, and I thought I was going to be a doctor. I went to, when I eventually got to Abilene Christian, I was pre-med, and I kind of had two sides of the family. Half of our family is in education, half's in medicine. And so I kind of got stuck in the middle a little bit, entrepreneurially outside of both, but sort of influencing both. And then, so as a kid, being asthmatic, the last thing I wanted to do was go for a distance run. But I would love to do stuff that really, if you look at it now, was weightlifting, plyometrics, sprinting, calisthenics. I couldn't wait for the President's Fitness Council to come around. And, you fast forward 40 years and you're on the President's Fitness Council, which was kind of in my own little mind, seeing that happen was, felt pretty good. But the whole idea is that what I did every day ended up having value as the society got more and more still. You had to start programming this stuff because it wasn't coming naturally. And so, last thing, I was a sprinter, and I was a wrestler, and I was a NorCal champion in wrestling, and I played basketball and started playing basketball year round. And my senior year came around, and I would sprint and track, but I didn't run around the track. I ran the straights and the turns, and I tried to be I wanted to long jump and hurdle and high jump. I just tried everything on the track. So, which is paying off now that I'm coaching track at St. Stephen's, because I actually did every event. I found out what I was good and not good at, and eventually my senior year after basketball was over, I grew up in a really small town in Northern California, so it was like there were 28,000 people in the town, and so I got to play. It was just small enough demographics, so I got to play anything I wanted to play. But I wanted to play football, but my brother, who was a football star his senior year, he was older than me. He got hurt. His kidney got hurt, and my mom was a nurse, and my dad was a football coach at the college, and my mom was a school nurse, and so my football career didn't begin because of how his ended. So I was always frustrated that I didn't get to play football, so I kind of channeled that energy into basketball. But I was, but now that I'm, 54 and still completely able-bodied, and who knows what would have happened in football, so I'm pretty thankful at this stage, even though, it's just, I love the game. And so I kind of had that frustration. But my my freshman in high school in PE, I remember, the way PE worked is that my PE was right after lunch. We had to do the mile for time, and it wasn't because we trained for it. We didn't warm up. We just had to go run a mile and check it off the box. Well, I remember taking off, and I didn't know that I was a good miler. I didn't want to, definitely didn't want to do it, but I ran a mile in PE as a freshman. I ran 5 flat on a dirt track right after lunch. I threw up my lunch with 200 meters to go, finished that mile, and last thing I ever wanted to do again was run another mile because that was so miserable. And the coaches hadn't seen a freshman run a 5-minute mile in PE before, so they spent 4 years recruiting me to run farther, and I was like, no way, I'm good, because I was anchoring the 4x1. So my theory is people run as far as they have to be good, And so my senior year after basketball was over, I can still vividly remember standing at the high jump pit after practice, and the distance coach kind of challenged me, and he came out and said, you're not tough. You're not tough enough to run the half mile. And so I took his challenge, and I ran the 800. My first one was 2:06. My second one was a 2 flat. My third one was a 155. And I, at that point in time, I was one of the leaders in Northern California, and ended up winning the NorCal championships, going to state, running a 153 high, I think. And my high school record was just broken, I think, a year ago after 30-some years. And that set me off on a completely different trajectory from hoping someone would let me play college basketball to now being recruited for track, right? So, and then they threw me in a 4x1 mile. And this is still... I never did a distance run in high scholl. So you would show up to the track, and every track workout was literally that, a track workout. We didn't leave the track. And I still hadn't run a distance run in my life. And they put me in a 4x1 1 mile relay. I remember because I started dating Sheila back in high school. She went to a different high school, but she rode down and watched me run this 4x1. So I knew it, knowing she was in the stands and running my first mile, and they put me at the anchor, and in the third lap, and being asthmatic again, in every 800 I ran, I threw up at the end of the race. So I knew I had finished the race, and I had to go find a spot because I was going to dry heave or throw up. So I started controlling my food so I wouldn't actually throw up, but I would still get the dry heaves afterwards because I'd go so anaerobic. Anyway, so I ran this, and I remember thinking in the third lap that if I hadn't been on a relay and if Sheila wasn't in the stands, I don't know if I would have finished the race. It was so horrible. But then the bell lap went off, and all of a sudden I was a quarter miler and ran, sub 60 and ran a 4:23 mile, my first mile since my PE mile as a freshman, which without ever running a distance run, and I was 17, so I graduated at 17. So over that summer, I started getting into running distance, and I went to college, and I was immediately a 1,500 meter, 800 meter guy, and I ran a 4:05 mile the next year. So just adding distance to my training in one summer, and then running my first cross country season in the fall, I built the aerobic capacity to run much faster.
And what year was this?
79 and 80.
So this is kind of, and just kind of connecting dots, this is in the era of when Nike was just formulating.
Yeah, I remember
and you're very close where you were growing up in the origin of Phil Knight and Nike.
Yeah, Northern California. We would drive 8 hours to run the Prefontaine Classic. But I remember in 72, like one of the reasons I was in the shoe business and the way we approached it was, and I remember in 1972, we had a friend that would go to Germany, and she came back with a pair of Adidas ROMs, which are obviously classics now. And they charged you, if I remember right, my mom telling me that they charged you $1 a size. So the bigger the shoe was, the more expensive the shoe was, which I thought was an interesting. But I was always like hyper aware of footwear. My mom had to drive me to. I had one leg that was short. I had knees that ached, and I remember driving to San Francisco and going to Marin County and getting orthotics made in 1978 or 77. Before I thought it was like some kind of there was something seriously wrong with me. Right, short leg, needed orthotics. It was kind of, I felt like a Forrest Gump with his braces falling off in that scene. So, but as you look at it now, 80% of the population has a short leg. Almost everybody, but I was always hyper aware of the footwear. I remember when Nike, the first pair of Nikes came out, because it was really an Adidas, New Balance, and Onitsuka Tiger show. Like those were the three choices. And then Nike came out with their first shoe. It was blue with a yellow stripe and a white midsole and the waffle outer sole. And these shoes I think were $12 or something like that. And I remember when the Cortez first came out, I couldn't wait to go to JCPenney's and get the new Cortez. It was just hyper focused on the footwear in the marketplace always. And I remember going into a store in Chico, which was kind of, and I'd bought these spikes that were for my competition, and they didn't fit right, didn't work right. So I tried to take them back, and they wouldn't take them back. But we had blown the money for spikes, and I was just so frustrated. Like it threw me in. That customer service threw me into the industry, like of just sourcing footwear on my own. I would call while I was in college, I had accounts with the major vendors, so I could buy footwear as a wholesaler. So I started just getting them for people on the team. And when we got to Austin, I got to know the sales reps here, and I would get all their samples, and we would, just have boxes and boxes of next season's stuff, and the usual stuff, selling it out of your trunk, just because gear was such a big deal. So the whole trilogy of the RunTex model was events, training, and gear. So, I was fanatic about training, and my training, because I came from a sprint background and a sport background, it was never distance running is like one or two of the workouts a week. The rest was sprinting and jumping and cross training, what they call it now. That was just how we trained, because it wasn't about. Then you would go run, and all that training would end up with some kind of running output. But anytime I would just start running as the workout, I would get slower. So I was like, this is.
So coming from, how did you make it? And I think there's a family connection, but from California to Abilene.
That was primarily I was raised Church of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
and there was very few options for family support for financially for which college you could go to. It was like Florida Christian for basketball or Abilene Christian for track. And so I came to Abilene Christian as a freshman right out of college. And 6 weeks later, I packed up and went home because I felt like I'd landed on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember being cold and dark, and I didn't know. I just didn't. It wasn't ready yet. So I went back. My dad was the dean at the college there, which was a JC. And in California, the JCs have really organized sport. The sports system in JCs in California is a big deal. And so I ran track at Butte College for 2 years. And then I transferred to UC Irvine. And Sheila was a year behind me in school, so she went to Butte. My dad and Sheila's dad taught college together since the college started.
Gotcha.
And so she went to Butte for a year, and then I went to UC Irvine, and she went to Brigham Young. And then I just kept having this literally, I don't know what you call it, reoccurring dream, but I just had this feeling that I need to get back to Abilene. Like, I don't know if I wanted to even the score or, go back. I loved Coach Hood up there, and I think, you might know Aaron Hood in town. It's her uncle,
Mm-hmm.
So, I called Coach Hood and I said, hey, I'm ready to come back. And I had progressed out of high school to be much faster, so he was happy to have me back. And Sheila didn't come initially. She was at BYU another semester. And then the December of '84, or that fall, when I went back, I went back first, and then Sheila followed me, and we got engaged and then got married December of '84.
Okay.
And so that's how we got to Abilene Christian. And then we ran Texas Relays. And in '85, I remember coming to Austin, falling in love with Austin. We went back to, I remember going to the library and getting the American Statesman and looking for job openings in Austin. And in Travis Country had a swim coaching job available. So Sheila and I applied for it and got it. So we drove down here and started coaching swimming at Travis Country. It was the summer league. And then my first gigs, because we were, Sheila had a year left of school, so she started going to UT, and I was getting ready for med school and started working at health clubs in town. So I was at the Metropolitan Club downtown, and I remember there was a chain of racquetball courts here. I forget the name of it, but I worked there, so it was always the 5 a.m. opening shift. And, it's just, I was playing out what I'm the exact same thing I'm doing today, I was doing then. We started, so it was just this whole lifestyle of that we were training for something, and we built a team around us, and we had to have the right gear, and eventually, I was coaching at St. Stephen's back then, and we kept coaching swimming, coaching at running at St. Stephen's, and we had formed a training group, and I remember hadn't put on an event yet. We were still traveling to compete. And then got involved. Coach Huntsman hired me on as an assistant coach at UT his last season, last couple of seasons. And then in like '97, this is where the Rosenthals, Peg Treadwell, her mom, and John Treadwell we had met them and became family friends, and they were our vet. And there was a RunTex. There was a guy, Bill McInerney, who had RunTex at 12th of the Mar, and he was a retired United Airline exec, and it was kind of his hobby. So I remember going in '87, and he was, Peg had told me he wanted to sell his running store, and he was doing like $60,000 a year in sales or something like that. And I, being a biology chemistry major, he started talking about, the cost for goodwill, and all this stuff. I didn't have any money to begin with, and I didn't really know what he was talking about. So we just went about our life, and a year later he was getting ready to just shut the doors, and so but he needed to find someone to sublease his space. So I committed to buying his inventory, which was $12,000 of inventory. It was mostly dead inventory or outdated. Take over his lease, and then it was $12,000 for the inventory. So I committed to that, called my parents and asked if I could borrow $20,000. and paid him for the inventory, took the lease over. And I'd already had the relationships with the vendors, so now I just had a place. So I started ordering product. And we got it in April of '88. And he had done $60K in sales the prior year, and we did 360 by the end of that year.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and so it was just, and we just started buying the stuff we liked, like,
right,
and selling it. So,
yep.
And then we started putting on it, like we put on the Congress Avenue Mile was the first event we ever put on. So when we first got to Austin, I remember being at the foot of the Capitol looking down. There were 2 races in town that I was aware of, the Cap 10 and the Bun Run. But I was like looking down Congress Avenue and I was just in love with the New York City Fifth Avenue Mile. I'm like, this is so amazing. So, you know, we put on, I remember going to city councilman and we got approval to run the Congress Avenue Mile. We had to go to the Capitol to get approval. So we brought in probably 10. It cost us $35,000 in appearance fees for the first race we ever put on. I was just sure that Michael Dell, because I'd started, at that point, I think I'd been coaching him a little bit, but I was just sure Dell would sponsor. So I made all these commitments, brought in the world's best milers, literally, because we knew them from the competing, and but they weren't going to come for free. So it cost us $35,000. Had the best mile race ever. It made got Runner's World Golden Shoe Award for the first race we ever put on, which put us on the map as a race producer, not just and no one came up to sponsor. So I had to go back to my parents and say, I need some more money. So they covered me on the $35,000. And but from that point on, we were sort of in the race business. But we noticed, we just did the natural thing. Like when you go to a track meet, you have to go to pick up your packet, get your race number. And so I was like, well, you'll come to RunTex and get your packet, right?
Right.
It wasn't like I was trying to sell shoes. I was just, that's where we were. You come get your packet and race the next day. And the sales went up, right? And so just something you just notice. People come by, they buy stuff.
So we can come back to this, but just to kind of stop you there, and 2 questions I asked is, when you came to Austin and you were a swim instructor and you were doing this, what was the environment of Austin? Like, bring us back to like 85, 86 for you to be here in this city. I
was just so surprised that, and it may have been this combination of coming from Northern California where it's beautiful, to Abilene, which I love Abilene, but it's like landing on the moon, to Austin, which was, you love Abilene because of the people, right? Because in California, I think you get to know people, but in Abilene, everyone was friendly, right? There's so much. So you get to Austin, it's a hybrid between Northern California and Texas. And and the running trails, like right downtown, are you kidding me? But it was a ghost town. There was nobody on the trail, like literally nobody on the trail, but especially compared to now. So, and there weren't, you know, it was a great town. It was like probably 300,000 or 400,000 people at that point. You had the university and you had the government, and then that was about it as far as major institutions that you're aware of, state government and then the university. And then Michael Dell gets rolling, and, you know, and being right down the hill from the Capitol, we literally, all the politicians would come down. So, you know, the regulars, Ann Richards, you know, I remember when House Representative Rick Perry introducing to Governor Bush at the store and got Governor Bush in the right shoes. And, you know, it's just, and Rick Perry was at Abilene. That's where he was from as we were competing. So I wasn't aware of him there, but he was aware of us from being in the local news as competitors, right? So it was just an interesting time because Austin became really an epicenter of the world, you know, and we all kind of grew up here at the same time. And Whole Foods was just starting. You know, Whole Foods was just down the street from us at 12th on Lamar.
Mm-hmm. And
and
that's like the uniqueness of like in the impact, and that's what I really want the listeners to really grasp and like to come back to the impact of the crossroads of, you know, Governor Bush, you know, at the time, Rick Perry, Whole Foods, RunTex, the Capitol. I mean, this is a unique time.
Yeah. Really,
you know, and the rolling impact of the people that were here at that period.
Wow,
is tremendous.
Yeah, and one of the groups. I mean, there's so many stories. We'll never get to them all, but we had the evening group at the time. It's either a morning group or an evening group, right? And the evening group had the people that were in the training group were, when you look at the folks in the group, like, Steve Sisson, and that's where he met Ruth in our training group. Steve lived in the store for a while, came out of UT. Kay Morris was in the training group, and we founded Marathon Kids together, and John Connolly and all these people. It was kind of like when you look at the music industry and you come back to these nucleus of people that were doing what they loved to do, had, didn't really know where it was going, but they knew what they were doing. They just didn't know how big it was going to get, right? It's things you hope for, but obviously you hope for those things and you can kind of see them, but we were just doing what we loved to do, and the impact that it's had through the years. Mixon Henry was in that group. It was just, we would run from RunTex at 12th and the Mar across the Capitol to get to UT when the track was still in Memorial Stadium, and Governor Bush would be walking out and stop the group, and you carry on a 5-minute conversation and roll on to the. It was just that kind of the pace was a little bit different. Hadn't gotten so serious yet. Hadn't gotten so big.
Yeah.
And Austin still has that, in a sense. And you continue to look at the layers of the eras where people get established and become successful, and then you always look back to the roots. And my thing is, I think I'm kind of inclusive, and I like to democratize. So I like to share it. I tend to bet on people instead of against them. Try to help them if I can, and so it's just it wasn't like I had to try to do that. It's just what I naturally do. It just makes me feel better to help people if they come into your life.
And speaking to that, you feel it was a natural, because you essentially, it's a huge buzzword in the sense of community, and everyone kind of wants to build their community. But this was a natural fit of a community of health and wellness and fitness and influencers.
Yeah.
Is it a natural trait of yours to kind of bring people together, or did you feel like what? It wasn't like I did a whiteboard thing and said, "Hey, if I do this, this will happen." I think it was more organic than that. Right.
And when you look back and you look at, even when I was in college at Butte College in Northern California in the early '80s, we had our track and cross country team, but I also always had I had folks that I sort of became the coach. And we'd have multi-generational people. I would have people from the community that would come and start training with the collegiate team. And even when I was at Abilene Christian, it happened. And the Africans wanted to train with us because we were doing it differently. We weren't, I think because of my asthma that I had to train differently. So the benefit of being asthmatic is even if you're fit, you're always at risk of not feeling fit. Right, so I'm always in a startup mode. I love to help people get started. I'm always circling back to the base conditioning because I wasn't a blue chip distance runner. I had to work for it, but I had to work for it differently. So I always trained differently, but I also was inclusive, and there was a natural thing happening. It wasn't, my intent wasn't to go out and try to recruit people. But if people came into our world, I would invite them in, right? And so most of the time, I think because RunTex, if you look at the event side of RunTex and the training side of RunTex, because we were situated in a retail environment with an open door policy of retail, that people felt like they could just come in because it was a retail store. We were helping them with shoes and putting on events and coaching them in the evenings, right? So there was all this access, so people could come in and ask, and we would help them. So when the first, if you look at the lineage of races in town, right? You've got we used to put on what it's now called the 3M Half Marathon, was the RunTex Half Marathon. And I had opened a second store, Sheila and I opened a second store in North Hill Shopping Center, which is just north of Arboretum. And it was 11.2 miles from the downtown store, and we would run from store to store, and we've kind of naturally found the path. We would just run what was safe, and we liked to run, and we'd get to RunTex. So we decided to put on a half marathon. And at that point, this was right after we put on the Congress Avenue Mile. And I kind of don't remember how we marketed back then because there was no internet. Mm-hmm. Like I literally have to think, what did we do to let people know? But we had like 800 people in the first RunTex Half Marathon. It was, there was like 6 of us that put it on. Ricardo and Carmen, Carrozza, me and Sheila and Barry. Barry and Susan were more on the mile, and we got the Austin Runners Club, Austin Triathletes. We put out all the cones, right? Peg Treadwell helped, and the Treadwell family, they were helping Sheila to finish with the refreshments. But we literally put on this half marathon with probably 12 of us. A couple water stops. The police would do leapfrogging, but you'd kind of have a huddle with the police ahead of time. The parade permit was like 2 pieces of paper. It was literally a parade permit. Yeah. Because that's all they had at the time was parades. And so I remember we brought in Frank Shorter, Bill Rogers, and Henry Rono, which, you know, if you don't know what those guys are, you kind of have to Google them. But Frank Shorter was an Olympic gold medalist in the marathon in '72, and Henry Rono had 5 world records from Kenya, from the 1,500 to the 10,000, and Bill Rogers won New York and Boston 7 times, and they'd never raced each other in history, and they raced in Austin at the RunTex Half Marathon. And so I remember we literally were at 2 a.m. putting out the cones because we had to get ahead of everything because it was like a 1-arm paper hanger. I remember being at the airport, dropping Frank Shorter off and getting a call on my walkie-talkie that the police wanted to know why the cones were still on the road. So I had to, after putting on this race, Sheila had to drive this big truck, and I ran the half marathon course and threw every cone in the back of the truck to get them off the road, and got home, and I'm like, I am never putting on another race in my life. And if it wasn't for people like the Treadwells and, you know, Lindsay and her family that like could see that I needed help and offered, and you're like, yeah, please, can you do, you know, we did the timing, we did the awards, we did the packets. We put, every finisher got a cookie, and we wanted like the things we would eat, the big cookie, not the little, you know. Right. And just real simple stuff. I just remember thinking, I can't believe I lived through that. And sitting on the couch and my phone rang, and it was a guy named Lyle Klug from Motorola, and he said that some of the execs had run our RunTex Half Marathon and had so much fun they wanted to put on a marathon at Motorola. Would I help them? And so I got excited again and went into the boardroom, and because we had been through every step, like painfully, I whiteboarded exactly the 33 committees we would need and 2,000 volunteers, and I asked, and I spent $15,000. I'd lost $15,000 on the half marathon because I paid each one of those 3 guys $5,000. Otherwise, it cash flowed even. So I said, well, you know, it cost us $15,000 to do the half marathon, so $30,000 we should be able to get a marathon done with all this volunteerism. And I remember, I think it was Jim George, as one of the execs, said, well, I think we want to do this right. So how about if we put up $250,000 for a budget, and we'll dedicate all these employees that it's part of their work time. And so within a year, we put on the first Motorola Austin Marathon, and I had an entire company behind it.
What year was this?
91, I guess.
So what was
that was the first?
At that time in 91, what was the national marathon scene like at this point?
Well, first of all, no one was going to run a marathon in Texas. I think Houston was struggling. White Rock was, you know, I don't know how many years old and had 1,200 people or something. Texas was not seen as a marathon. And I thought we'd get about 1,000 marathoners in Austin. You know, marathoning was for pure runners at the time. It wasn't a popular thing. Mm-hmm. And I just knew we were going to spend $250,000 and all this human work and end up with 1,000 people, and they're going to do the math and never come back, right? So I talked them suggested a marathon relay, and that added 5,000 people to the mix because there were enough people that could run 5Ks and 10Ks that the marathon relay would really made the event. Wasn't till, you know, year 5 or so that the marathon relay were starting to collide because we were creating our own traffic problems because of all the relay exchanges. So we pulled the marathon relay out when the marathon was ready to stand alone. Mm-hmm. And then started looking for a sponsor for the marathon relay, which ended up being Silicon Labs. And then we had 2 events. Yep. Right. And so then after Motorola, and then I always tried to figure out who the best nonprofit was for an event. So I always tied a nonprofit to the events. So our first nonprofit was going to be for the marathon. We said we were going to light Town Lake, the running trail, so you could run at night. And it just turned into a huge, at the time, pre-internet, it turned into a problem PR-wise because the neighbors didn't want Town Lake lit, so we switched. But that model of having a nonprofit started with the Austin Marathon for us. And then then MCI called, and they wanted an event, and the only other event I had was at the time was the half marathon, so it was called the MCI RunTex half marathon. They paid the bills for it because I didn't want to lose $15,000 again. And then the phone just kept ringing, and either a nonprofit would walk in and want an event, or a company would call and would want to sponsor an event. And now they both happened, and we just kept building. Then we created the distance challenge. John Connolly had called the Sundown Classic out in Circle C. So we started tying the races in town that kind of led to the marathon and packaged it as the distance challenge and gave people a jacket if they finished it. And we started for 17 years. We were a major Cap 10 sponsor and did the production. Bun Run, we would get in and get real involved. Then we started creating training programs. So I remember going to Sandy Aikens at Motorola when we first started the marathon and said, hey, you guys are sponsoring the marathon. Let's start training programs at Motorola so your people can train for the marathon too. So this was, in the 90s where we were having running programs on site. And you just start the pattern, and then pretty soon RunTex retail business was just flourishing because of all the connections we were making. People, talk about connectivity, it's through doing projects with people. We got in the trenches and we would be on a year-round project focused on one weekend. And then you start lining that up with every weekend or 2 or 3 races every weekend. And at RunTex, we would do the hard stuff that you would never get good at if you're doing it once a year. And we had them do the things that we'd never be good at if we were doing it every weekend, like getting volunteers, getting sponsors, getting media. Like, if you can't keep calling the same people over and over, but they had their own fresh connections that they were tapping once a year. And so that's how the running community was built. And the training programs all started flourishing because as people start training for something, it gives them structure, it gives them timelines. And then you socialize it, and then you get a coach. And then pretty soon people that used to be getting coached are now the coaches, and then the layers continue.
Yeah. It's a beautiful process of seeing like this organic, thing, the running community, the connection to shoes, and it flourish and just the overall impact on a city, and a nation. I think so. And then I got to, and then I started doing the Runner's World Shoe Review. So we got voted, I forget what year it was, but Runner's World voted us the #1 running company in the country. And then I started doing the Runner's World Shoe Review, which was the sort of me and Wish, Bob Wishner, who's in Austin now. We were Siskel and Ebert of shoes, thumbs up. Basically, we literally, the shoe companies would ship us a couple thousand shoes every 3 months, and we had to get people to try them out and write about them. And 2 million people were reading Runner's World at the time, and the industry was really connected because they couldn't wait to see what we thought of the shoes, right? And so then pretty soon because I was so passionate about how shoes should be, but my bias for shoes was I came from running fast, and I would, like, if you're on a track running in spikes, you're kind of effortless at your foot level. And then you get into running shoes on the road and you feel like you have work boots on, and I kept trying to get that perfect, how do you get the same feel of track spikes, how do you get that on the road? So I kept wanting to make shoes lighter and more responsive, and because I was selling, $7 million of shoes a year and writing the shoe review, we had a lot of listeners, and we're able to get them to make the shoes that we wanted to run in. So it's just nice that whole era was just hyper connected and everyone was focused on doing just what we love to do, just purely on passion. And I wanted better shoes to sell, and each shoe company would want to know what they could do to be a better shoe company and be more relevant in the marketplace. And then you see in the shoe industry, you see those core people that were all at Nike that started peeling off and going to Brooks and Saucony and New Balance, and then they would take what they learned at Nike and upgrade those companies. So you could just map where these people came from and where they are, and their impact. So now, through this journey and with I mentioned your children now who are now teenagers and in the fitness and health and wellness themselves. How is that, the culture and community that they were raised in, how's that corresponding? And I know because
Yeah.
you and Sheila have a unique. I mean, it was always the thing was like the kids were with y'all.
Yeah.
You know, and all the time.
Yeah, the kids. I mean, they've had I think if you look at their lifestyle and the things we've been exposed to, you know, they're pretty well. They don't see barriers when they think of different industries because they've been inside them. You know, they've been able to be in the boardrooms at Nike and be in the Oval Office at the White House and to be in the sets at Friday Night Lights and see how the producer and the director and the actors are really, you know, they're at UT swimming with, you know, Michael Phelps walking in and out, and these Olympic athletes, and the Texas athletes that are Olympians. They're just around him, so they get to see that the reality of it all, and that it's coming down to focused hard work on a repetitive basis. I mean, athletics is a bit of insanity because you keep doing the same. The insanity of athletics is just doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So, in one sense, athletes are a little crazy. In how you keep from being crazy is you keep tweaking your training to get better results so that you aren't crazy. Mm-hmm. But the repetitive nature of any world-class anything is, and you see Willie Nelson and the fact that he's willing to get off that bus again, go up there and sing On the Road again, or Whiskey River again, and he's, you know, how many times they've had or got to sing it, mm-hmm. and that's what people are paying to see. And so I think part of athletics is just that, and my biggest, so my kids, like, they've been exposed to this, but they've seen what the routines are for the best in the world in a lot of industries, right? So they just see how media can make it seem bigger than life, but it's still, no matter what, once you get into it, it's life. Mm-hmm. And if you stay focused and you're good at it and you keep working at it, you know, you can become the best in the world, or get to know the best in the world and see that they're human, they're just focused. And they're willing to keep showing up and doing the same thing over and over. Mm-hmm. But they've picked the right thing to do over and over.
Yeah. And so we were talking about your daughter earlier. She's a UT mm-hmm. swimmer and has done some of the Olympic trials. And
yep.
Was that for her just a natural, like, I'm going to swim?
Actually, it was one thing we would believe in on a daily basis is, you know, being physically active with purpose. And you know, we lived about 5 or 6 miles from RunTex, and, you know, Sheila would say, okay, we're walking home. And pretty soon Quinn was like, I want to swim. I don't want to have to run anymore. I don't have to walk anymore. But, you know, we would take the kids, and about once a week we didn't hit them every day. And because I didn't come from a distance running background, and Sheila came from an athletic family, but when I met her, she was a head cheerleader at Durham High School. And we started training a lot together, and, you know, she obviously became a world-class runner on the U.S. She was on the U.S. team in '93 for 3,000 meters. So she, you know, we just see through this repetition and doing these drills on hills, and so our kids, you know, we didn't make them do it every day. We didn't beat them like a dead horse, but they were exposed to it on a regular basis. So literally once a week they'd do drills on hills, and that was literally our plan. Mm-hmm. Or they'd walk home, and we'd go for family, we'd go for a walk, and so they were just out, acclimated to the heat, strong, used to being on their feet. You know, their muscles were 360 degrees of fitness and conditioning, but we weren't training them so hard that we were kind of working against growth. They got lots of sleep. Like, rest is super important. Their food choices were not crazy weird, but compared to most of America, they're probably super high quality, you know, growing up with Whole Foods. And one thing I think is interesting with us is that when you go to Whole Foods and let everybody pick what they want, you know, the foods that makes them feel good, you end up, everyone had a good body type. And sometimes I think when you look at families and you have one meal for 5 or 6 people and you get different outcomes, it's because maybe it's the wrong meals for each one. It could be more, because as soon as our daughter went gluten-free, her physique changed and her energy levels changed. So if we had kept her on wheat, she may have never been an athlete. Mm-hmm. Right? But she basically, and she hated swimming at first too. When she was learning how to swim, she was frustrated with it. We put her in summer swim team, and she would start frustrated and end winning. Right? And then summer swim team would end, and then pretty soon she was like, I want to swim you around, when she was like 12 or 13, because I don't want to have to do this stuff. She didn't want to have to run. And so then she just kind of in her own mind, it became important to be. She did the work to get to the front. She had the physical physique to do it, and Sheila's side of the family were competitive swimmers, so there were some genetic benefits to it, and it's just what we did, just what we do. Our lifestyle is very focused. Probably for a lot of people it seemed really boring, but when it comes time to perform, we had some pretty good outcomes, right? And so I think that's part of it. Is it, but the kids, they play every sport. And our philosophy was, if you aren't going to go play it, I'm not going to sign you up, put you in a league, and pay someone else to have you play. Like, if you're not interested in playing it on your own, I'm not going to invest money in that sport. So get some friends and go play. Yeah. Right? Because, I just think that the kids have to have interest in it. I think one societal thing that's gone wrong is the breakdown of intramurals in schools has created quite a marketplace opportunity. Because when intramurals broke down, PE broke down. Because people don't tend to train unless they're training for something. So if everyone's in intramurals, they tend to be more engaged in conditioning and PE because they're in intramurals. My college roommate did his PhD on the whole breakdown of intramurals, and he showed that that's what killed PE. The interest in PE was the lack of intramurals.
And when you say intramurals, what do you mean by that?
After school inclusive sport, or in school inclusive sport. So what's happened is, I'm not against the education system not feeling responsible for physical activity in a sense, because it created a marketplace for it, and I'm a big fan of marketplace. So if you look at Austin, the greatest thing I think that we may have done is help build a marketplace, because I like people creating the micro units. So everyone that would come through RunTex, a lot of the entrepreneurs would come in and be really an asset to the company, find their own way, and then would spin off and run their own business. So my goal wasn't to build a bigger and bigger RunTex. It was I was keep trying to make it smaller, and I would spin off business units so that they could do what they did best, and not, because RunTex was a good launch pad, but then it became a weight. Right, for a while it helped you get off the ground, and then pretty soon it was holding you back. And so major events, chiming company, Raceworks, Runfar, Rogue Training, Gilbert's Gazelles, they were all came through RunTex, and there was a point where we were helpful, and then there was a point where they needed to be able to go on and stay focused, because I kept keeping RunTex trying to be focused on sort of helping the next generation of marketplace and retail. Retail sales were our biggest generator of revenue. And I think the thing that I made a mistake in business-wise is I didn't need to have a lot of locations. If I had just stayed to one or two, maybe one, we'd have been a much stronger company. I tried to get convenient, which raised our overhead, and we never sold more shoes by being more convenient. We just increased our overhead because people, and I knew this when I started, is that people were going to drive to Town Lake and run more often than they were going to buy shoes. And so when I was trying to get convenient, I was trying to take the training and community element. Like, I would see Mopac turning into a parking lot, and I was like, they're not going to get down here and train. So I tried to put the stores up there, but there wasn't a Town Lake to train at, so there was not the focal points. They didn't have the physical attributes. But it just created overhead. And the employees that wanted to work for RunTex wanted to work at RunTex. They didn't want to be on another planet. So they always felt like they were not at RunTex anymore. Yeah. Right, because we had this unique vibe, and a lot of it had to do with our location. I mean, we had the best location on the planet, both of them. Yeah. Both downtown ones were just didn't get any better than that.
Which is unique in Austin and we can kind of move the conversation, down the field in the sense of, 2016, we're moving into 2017. Yep. I mean, you talk about everything has changed. Yep. And it's going to keep changing, but not only just from the real estate and the buildings and the population, but you're also looking at online sales like Zappos and shoe sales, and the whole retail market. It's been changing, and it is changing, and will be completely changed. Yeah. So I'm curious, from do you analyze this? Do you look at it? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I struggled because I was so deep in so many elements of this industry, events, training, and gear, and retailing, and online, and I was so deep into so many years that, and my ego isn't one that wants to create an entire enterprise to have it all. So I look at it and think that small business and lifestyle businesses where people can make a living and have is really helpful. The problem is the technology platforms. I think what's going to happen is the technology platforms are going to create small, effective businesses. So the smaller business people will have more resources to be efficient, so they can keep their overhead down and leverage software packages the technology piece. So people are going to be wearing the measurables. So as a coach, my big thing, so if we talk about coaching first, what I keep pushing for when I'm talking to technology people is I want wearables, right, and measurables on athletes, and I want to, as the coach, be able to have passive measurement of what they're doing, have it make sense, but in a data format that I can have a dashboard. So that athlete can see their dashboard, I can see my athlete's dashboard, and then I think it's heading to artificial intelligence that helps in a sense that if you get this big data and you start looking at trends and you look at body types, and it really can give us some great information down the road. So I think the best thing is to be an expert in your field and don't ignore artificial intelligence. As the technology people figure out how to do it, someone still has to be intelligent enough to program it. Mm-hmm. Right. So I keep looking at, in the running space, for example, how do we have measurables that I can set the parameters within the software so that we can take the fact that we can measure you now, we can know your goal is X and it's in X amount of time, and we know your status now, and we can create a plan that has you heading in the right direction. That's also measuring your reality of, like, we recommend a workout, you do it, we get the results before we recommend the next workout. We can also analyze what's missing and what you should be working on more or less. So, because when you work with an expert, you sort of get a chef who's looking at you. There's a bunch of stuff going on in your head that says you should do this tomorrow. Okay, how did it go? I'm either watching you or you're telling me, right? And then I'm going to tell you what I think you need next. Then we're going to see you race. And so if you look at the difference between being around a master and then having to buy into a franchise, right? People prefer to have a master or a chef cooking for them, right? But so how do you get those as a master? How do you get those elements in your head and the pathways and how they interact? And can you create your brand of artificial intelligence that's helping people so that you can expand your methodologies without always having to be there? Mm-hmm. And I don't like to take workouts and bog them down with measurement. So with technology being able to measure passively, it gives us a chance to move in that direction. So I think as far as training goes, I think that's where it's headed. Then it merges in with medical, and if anything we do for athletes is going to trickle down into people that need to get healthy. So on the completely sedentary side, the investment will be made for them because the society can't afford to pay for the medical costs, so we're going to train them properly. But that initial training technology is going to be on the elite performers first, because that's where the market is, and that knowledge will be transferred down to people that are completely sedentary and deconditioned. Mm-hmm. Right. So then if you look at gear, I think the future of gear is try-on centers, local try-on centers with experts, and centralized supply.
And what does that look like?
What I was most excited about RunTex is when I was doing the shoe review and I had every shoe in the market available to me, and you would come in and I'd be like, okay, I don't want to charge you $500 to take 5 shoes home with you, but let's take 5 shoes home with you as part of Runner's World Shoe Review. You're going to take time to go through each one of them, figure out which one you're feeling better in. At this point in time, we can have wearables that also give us good feedback to know which one's better. But what would happen in that process is I would know which shoes to give editor's choice to, because when I gave out these shoes to 50 different people, 40 of them would come back and say, that was my best shoe, right? So a try-on center says, hey, instead of you running up and down the store for me when you're fresh, indoors, showing off, I want you to really go for a run. Now, you'll come in, you check out shoes, check out as many as you want. And once we're sure it's the right shoe for you, right, you'll pay for that service. Let's say it's $25 to go through a try-on. But then you're sure of the shoe you want, and now you buy it. And I kind of don't care where you buy it from, because that's central. That you can get it on the internet. You can go to, because once you commit to owning inventory to sell to customers, you're limited in your scope. Big Amazons and Zappos, right? They have the centralized supply. All the vendors want to be there. All the shoes are there, but they're limited to the physical. They're not in the physical world. So I think the future is that me as a shoe expert, I can work with you as a service, be an expert, and then you can buy the shoe we determine. It's kind of like separating. In the shoe industry for a while, the doctor and the pharmacy were the same. My goal is to separate the two, saying I'm a doctor and you're gonna have to go to the pharmacy to get your shoes, but we're gonna try the stuff on here to know it's the right shoe for you. Now you can go buy it, but I'm not selling you something. We've tested it, it's better, you're running better, you're feeling better. Now you want to, because I started looking at running shoes as hard goods instead of soft goods. So if a shoe is part of your gear, it's the bike you ride, it just wears out, but you get another one of the same thing. It's kind of like an 18-month or 2-year shoe broken up into different pairs. But you need to be in the same shoe because it's right for you. So that's one thing I see coming, is that I think the running specialty industry has to really start thinking about being, and the shoe companies are starting to drop like flies a little bit because they're losing marketplace. No one wants to carry the product, because if it doesn't sell, then you have invoices due, and then they shut you off, and your supply chain stops, and so it's a mess. Right, so that's where I think the future solution is.
So kind of coming to a few ending questions. So with the George W. Bush presidency and coming on to his council and with health and wellness or fitness, how was that experience, and really what did that look like?
It was surreal. I mean, it was a lifetime achievement award for sure. At that point, I guess I was in my 40s, and at the moment you're at the White House behind the president, and you're next to Lynn Swan and Emmett Smith, and the whole world's watching. Literally, it felt like you'd been done a lot of things right in your life, and then the flip side was that local is more powerful than national, because you realize unless you're the president and make it your focus, you can't do it from a press conference. So I came back from the President's Council, and we went around our first day, and everyone in the council said they wanted to fix PE in schools and make that the place till we get America Fit. And the ethics attorney at the end said, sorry, can't touch PE, it's a local issue. You literally will get kicked off the council if you go lobby as a President's Council member for PE. So everyone's like, well, then I'm not sure what we can do. Because there was no budget, we couldn't get sponsors, so the programming was tough. So I came back and talked to Vic Perry. I'm like, we got to create a Texas Governor's Council on Fitness, because this is our sandbox. And so we created the Governor's Council on Fitness, and we had got a great group of people together from around the state and got some stuff rolling, but we didn't have a budget. It was just what we could do, influence based on our own connections and our own ideas. And then we started the Texas Roundup. That was our program. Because to me, if you don't program fitness, you don't get any outcome. Just messaging, you're preaching to the choir a bit if you don't create a program. And I also believe in workplace programming, and I also believe in making it during the workday, because of the theory of relativity, is I'd rather go for a nice, easy, appropriate workout than sit in my cubicle. You send them, you have them stay after or come in on the weekend during family time. You just, whether you're motivated or not, you have commitments. So it had to be a workplace during work initiative. We were pretty successful. And I got frustrated again because we didn't have the resources to do something statewide on a big scale. So Texas Roundup was touching probably 7,000 people. But so then I went to Mayor Wynn, and I said, we got to do a mayor's council. And all of a sudden, things really started clicking, because at a local level, we were very highly effective. So I went back to Governor Perry. I still have the email, and I'm like, if we focus the Governor's Council on funding and creating mayor's councils, then we're going to get something done. And that was during session, and we got $1 million in like within 3 weeks to go out and start mayor's councils on fitness. And that was highly effective. And so what I learned through the whole process is that the national, and the other thing too is if we did something nationally and you connected to the consumer or the citizen nationally, the feds own the data, and you couldn't come back out. So you had to create the data at the local level, and it had to roll up.
It's such a, from the aperture of going macro to micro, that message alone is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Because you could feel like, you could be at the micro level being like, oh, I wish I was at the macro level. I wish I was but now in just your experience and you framing that down, it's like, no, you are in charge. You can influence.
It's not going to get any better than this. And that's kind of where I'm at with my own life now. It's much more of a helping others understand and then having my own private practice, because when I'm actually doing what I do, I'm having the most impact. So if I have a group of 20 people that have gone from, and I focus right now on middle-aged and middle school. Mm-hmm. Being middle-aged and having kids in middle school, and I just know that so well, and I'm comfortable with it, and that's where my confidence is. And so that's where I'm focused. And so finding your focus is important. Staying relevant to your generation is really important. And then if you're going to scale, there are people that are destined to scale. And if you look at the medical community, right, there's doctors who have private practices, then there's a group practice, then there's a minor emergency clinic, and then there's a hospital, and then there's a medical center. And so people are destined to hit different levels. But as soon as you step off your private practice, you're moving into administration mostly. So that could be good or bad. Do you want to be an administrator, or do you want to be in practice?
There's so much wisdom. Because as young, you see, now at 35, and I've really gauged, last 10 years of what I've done in this space, is that you always think as you're motivated, ambitious, you want to go bigger, but then you start to realize where your real impact is and when admin comes into play, and now you're handcuffed.
Yeah. You're not doing what you do anymore. And I may not be, because I know what I was good at, but running a multi-site retail business, I ended up not being good at. Mm-hmm. I was good at a lot of other stuff, but I wasn't good at running and I didn't empower people that were really good at that to do that piece so that I could do what I was good at, right? Yeah. I kind of created a level. I had the talent, I just didn't structure it properly.
So interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, okay, so I guess kind of coming up and wrapping up here is, there's just a lot of wisdom I hear from you coming in. And how old are you right now?
54.
54, so still young.
I feel pretty young.
Yeah.
There's not much I can't do that I've always done.
Yeah. So from the last 54 years, the work with the highs and lows and where you are now, like if you were to distill down 3 lessons that you would like to pass on to people or listeners, what are 3 things that you could give to people immediately that could impact their lives?
I think that it's really important to sort of find a routine that you can be the healthiest person you can be, because ultimately when you lose your health, everything else falls apart. So I think health is super important. Relationships are super important. And then I think it's also, if you can turn your passion into a profession, ultimately in modern society, if you can figure out how to do what you love to do and have it create value for other people, because we're in an age of specialization and that we have to have a financial exchange these days in a lot of ways to pay bills, right? So if you can monetize your passion and be professional about it and not, I think that's a really great way to live your life, is to be doing stuff that you're not, some people are professionals that are doing stuff that they're professionals at, but they can't wait for evenings, weekends, and vacations. And I think when you're doing what you love, you feel like a vacation or a holiday is interrupting the things you love to do, because everyone else you've stopped, like the group's not meeting. So I don't look forward to holidays if our gang's not getting together because it's a family day, and so that kind of, not that you don't want to spend time with your family at holidays, but I'm saying if you're doing what you love to do and you can make a profession out of it, but not the expense of relationships or your health. Right, I think that's really important. It's to and health. You can become unhealthy being an extreme fitness addict. So I'd say also don't get addicted to your fitness and take it too far. But that's kind of what when you look at the end of the day, at the end of the day, at the end of the year, at the end of a lifespan, I think getting closer to what's going to matter later, because I think in the building of RunTex, I really, the relationship we built, right, the people we've touched in a way that opened their eyes to a lifestyle that improved their health. And we weren't trying to put people on a weight loss program, but a lot of people were getting in shape and losing weight. And to me, weight's not a problem. Deconditioning is a problem. The 3 areas of conditioning I think are important are being conditioned to move, to be out in the sun, and to be in the elements. The temperature elements are really critical. I think the biggest problem we have is spending too much time in fluorescence and air conditioning, because you get deconditioned from that, which leads more to physical activity deconditioning. But even if you're super fit indoors, I think there's something lacking from not being outdoors. So I think sweating, shivering, and I think of the human skin of being like a good loaf of bread when it's cooked just right. It's a nice finish on it. I think there's a huge value to having exposure to the sun at the right level, so that and the lighter your skin, the less time it takes. Darker the skin, the more time it takes, and the more time you can handle. But I just think having a nice finish on your skin, and not just your top of your hands and your face. I'm talking about your body. So I think that there's those are things that I really worry about our population. I think there's so many hormonal problems that come from just lack of sunshine and lack of outdoors. Yes. That we chase through, going to doctors, and we don't realize how simple it is.
I know. I mean, just with you saying that, talking with Nicole, our producer, is that really, in my whole life dedicated to health and wellness, I feel that hormonal response and gut health are the key factors in overall health and wellness.
Absolutely.
And a lot of our outside sources we're looking to affect our hormonal response and our gut health is that it's from the internal that we need to get healthy.
Gut is huge.
Oh yeah. And so that's really where I think even more now my dedication to health and wellness is in those areas. Yep. And then how we are regulating that through our physical activities and what we're consuming. And it's like you're talking about is our regulation of the temperature, and because all this stuff is impacting us, and that's why it's unique in Austin. What I love about, we got Barton Springs, we got the pool, we got the trails,
the physical assets,
so many assets.
I think that the human body gets confused because there's no time in history for their ancestors that lack of sunshine and lack of movement wouldn't mean that you're sick or hibernating. Right? You're either in a sick mode or you're in a hibernation mode, and it's only in modern times that you would have a constant, abundant food supply when there's a lack of sunshine and movement. Right? So if you're indoors year-round, I think your body's in a weird place year-round. Seasonality is super important. I think, and what I started doing was trying to figure out what was bringing me down from my food intake. Right? Why did I feel like after I ate these things, I need to go for another run to get clear again? And to your gut health deal, I think probiotics are really important. Also, the separation of foods, so you can identify the ones that are bringing you down and the ones that are power food for you. The seasonality of food. Then there's also, if people would literally get hungry before they eat again, I think there's a huge benefit to literally getting hungry first and then eating instead of avoiding hunger, because from a weight gain standpoint, there's a benefit because you're not in storage mode with every calorie, because you're letting the tank drop before you put more gas in. Right. So, but I just think that also I just started really getting clear on how what foods were good for me and what foods weren't. as far as emotion, and I figured if it was bringing me down emotionally, there's other negative impacts. What foods I can eat pre-workout, what stage of training I'm in. Am I in a new stage of training where there's a lot more breakdown and I need a lot more protein, or am I in a maintenance, or am I backing off? Mm-hmm. So it gets pretty sophisticated.
Do you go off of feel? Are you reading? Are you?
I'm always reading, and I think reading tends to, but most of my reading a lot of times confirms hopefully what you are feeling and thinking. And I've been exposed to this stuff for 50 years, so there's not much new under the sun. It's just articulated different, and science is catching up. And but I think it's just I learned, Willie Nelson told me one time, you spend your lifetime just figuring out what's toxic for you and getting it out of your system, like, and finding the things that are good for you. And I think that's the journey we're all on then your body starts changing as you're aging, and so there's no autopilot in life. I mean, you're going to have to keep working on it. And I think the seasonally, and like sometimes I'm not opposed to red meat, but if I'm going to eat it, I want it high quality, and I want to be craving it. I don't want to do it just because it's 12.
Right.
And it's like once a week maybe once. And I'm also in the mode I'm in training right this time of year. I'm not getting a lot of demand for red meat, but if I was really sprinting a lot or doing something that I'm really trying to reach a new level and I'm breaking down more, I'd be more. I should crave it if my body's working right, but I'll also know that I need it more.
Yes.
Right. If you're sweating a lot and it's summertime, the fruits that you need are different than in the winter when it's cold and you're shivering all the time. Like, who wants a cold apple in the middle of winter? Right.
Yeah.
You're probably going to want more animal products or more, different kinds of foods than you're going to want in the summer that are more plant-based. So if you take animal versus plant-based and the percentages and the seasonality of it, we're so far from being fine-tuned that we're in this toxic mode. Most of Americans are just toxic. And one benefit of working out is you rarely see people that are working hard eating. Right? It's a period of work. The body was meant to nourish, store, do work, replenish, nourish, store, do. Like, it's a cycle. When you're sitting all the time and there's this constant low heart rate, ability to eat, right? You never take a break for it, and then you start needing sugars and caffeines because now you don't have the serotonins. And so this new lifestyle we're dealing with we're really in this era of figuring out how to be productive and healthy and happy in the modern times. Like, as far as we know, humanity's never been here before. We're the pioneers. The folks that are in your generation that never got out of shape, are working a lot in technology and maintaining physical activity and health and emotions because, you guys as a generation are much more in tune to it, where the generation that was before you was adapting to it midstream. Right? So there's this divide of families that are getting it and their offspring are even better, or families that were never exposed and their offspring are even worse. So I think my observation is that we don't just pass on this genetic code like it's ancestral. Like, I think that it's I call it get in shape, pass it on. I call it get educated, pass it on. Right? I think that there's so much of your current state of knowledge, of energy, of physical fitness. There's obviously your genetic makeup, but the better you make it, the more your offspring get at the time of conception, and then while they're in the mother's womb, she's affecting it even more. And then when they're born, they're starting with an advantage or a huge disadvantage based on what you were when you had it. So I see these superstar offspring, and then I see this society that's going to have conditions the rest of their life. They're born with, adult diabetes, are born with all these type 2 things because their parents were in that state when they were conceived. And now what their parents, the lifestyle led to that, they're born with.
It's such an interesting thought, even more now than ever, that you are more in control of your circumstances with the proper education and tools And I think that's maybe what you're speaking to
Yep.
too, is if you have the tools, then you can really direct your life and your
sure.
offspring
Well, why-
in the future.
Well, yeah, why are the third world countries standing still? And I think a lot of it has to do with, as you start educating people from third world, they get smarter, their kids get smarter, and they catch up. It takes a couple generations, but they're right in the game. And they may be coming from a place where they're actually more motivated. And then in America, you could be degrading if you're in this living the American lifestyle, not taking advantage of education, fitness, proper nutrition. You might be sending your family tree downhill. So it's a huge responsibility, not only as a society to understand that, but as an individual level to influence that.
That's good. I'm getting I'm having all these wild epiphanies, which is really good. I mean, and I want to wrap up, but we could probably just keep talking because I love to hear your thoughts on things. But we're on so many levels at a crossroads in America with what, our overall, the current generation, the generation coming, what life they will inherit in the next 20 and 30 years.
Yep.
And hearing what you're saying, it's really starting to make sense to me about the current structure of where we're going with life expectancy actually decreasing.
Right.
Quality of life decreasing. Why is that happening? And in the environment that you're depicting with your words of the temperature, the air, what they're being put into, and I think of in my mind the pressure. It's the pressure is reduced, so the refinement isn't there, and that's the sedentary lifestyle and person that's being created.
Yeah.
And it's what would shift that or what would change that.
I think when I look at the fact that we continue to have more and more kids, right, and those kids go through the system, and are they coming out of the system independent and productive or dependent and unproductive to society? And I think that's that should be our number one focus: is are we creating? Is our the first 18 years of the lifespan, which first 20 years determine 80% of your health, but that's one area of concern. The other is can an individual create value to the society long term by what they're doing in their first 20 years? Are we creating future values in independent people? Because if the 80-20 is productive to unproductive, we're okay. If it's 20% productive, 80% unproductive, and I'm only measuring that by the ability to make a living, right? So if you think about it, if we're producing productive people, as our society grows, our economy grows. If we're producing unproductive people as a majority, as our society grows, the more trouble it's in, the more debt-ridden it is. And the other thing is we have to separate time and money. Right now, I think people there's more money being spent per minute than are being being earned, which means as time goes, we're increasing debt. Right, so we have to flip that, but you have to think about creating a lifestyle that everything you do can't directly cost money, unless you're making an excessive amount to pay for that. Right, so that's at one level. But I worry most about our future because there's one level that's this macroeconomic level that's a huge problem. But I also think about self-esteem and that the way we were created, we always feel better when we do good work and we feel horrible when we don't. And so by not making productive people, we're actually hurting their own life experience. So we should be finding out what people are good at, trying to make a profession out of it, right? And there's all kinds of, we talk all day about how to do that.
No doubt. Well, I feel just kind of to capstone what we're saying is I definitely feel more motivated to do the work that I'm doing out of this conversation than more. It definitely says
if you look at what's missing the most in our society and what could be the turnaround, I think being physically fit and powerful could turn our country around quicker than any other program. Because that's what's lacking the most. And so if you look at medical, you look at psychological, you look at educational, we all know that being physically fit benefits all of that. And if those are all the problems, this is the solution.
Okay. Let's get to work.
Yep.
All right, Paul.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir, so much. Thank you so much for joining us on the Amplify Podcast. You can find more at theamplifypodcast.com. Our social links to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Join us in conversation. Let us know what you're thinking and how we can best service you guys. We will see you again really soon.